Okay, now today and then in the next section, we're going to look at going back to solving our equations. Now, the ones that we're primarily going to solve today and in the next section are ones that you will not be able to factor. Now, there are a few exceptions here because I wanted y'all to see, kind of how things look doing it a different way, but generally the purpose of this is when you can't factor. Now, I manufactured this problem right here. I want us to leave it as is. Now, normally if we were solving like we did a few minutes ago, we would subtract, not a few minutes ago, I videoed these together, but in the lesson a few days ago, then we would move the 36 over, get it set equal to 0 so that we could factor. I want us to not do that right now, just because I want you to see something. So I'm going to just factor it as is right now. So if I factor it, I'll have x and x, 5 and 5. Okay, so that's good. Bring down my 36. Or I have x plus 5 squared here. Okay, now here's the reason that I want you to see this. We did the square root method the first day that we talked about solving these. I could actually go through and take the square root of this, and what's the square root of x plus 5 squared? It's just x plus 5, right? And then I have square root of 36. I do need my plus or minus here, 6. And then I'll move my 5 to the other side and solve. So let's see what we end up with. So I have two things. I have positive 6 minus 5. Okay, so one of my answers is 1. Negative 6 minus 5. My other answer is negative 11. So there are my two answers. Okay, now here's the reason I sort of manufactured this problem and did it a weird way. Our goal in this solving method called completing the square is to create this situation right here, where we've got a perfect square so that we can take the square root of both sides and solve. That's our goal today. So let's go through and let's look at a couple of these. Oh, well, first I want to make sure we know how to make the perfect square, and then we'll look at a couple of them. Okay, so if you're completing the square, and we're not actually solving here, we're just going to decide on a number to complete the square to make it factor to a perfect square. What you want to do is take your middle term, so here I have negative 8, take half of it, and square that. So 16. That's what I'm going to put in right here. Now let me write that down, and then I want us to factor it and see what we end up with. So I'm just going to factor this thing. So I'll have x and x minus 4 minus 4, or x minus 4 squared. Now what I want you to notice is that when I put in the 16, I wasn't just able to factor this thing, I was able to factor it to a perfect square. That's why it's called completing the square. Now I also want you to notice that this number that was half of the negative 8 is what we ended up with right there. That's not a coincidence. That will happen every time. Okay, so the number that we would add in here to create a perfect square would be half of the 6 and then square it, so 9. If I were to factor that thing, I would have plus 3 and plus 3, or x plus 3 squared. Okay, so let's actually look at solving now. So if we are going to solve by completing the square, then what you want to do is get rid of any extra numbers that you have here so that you can choose the number we're going to put right there to complete our square. So I'm going to move the 1 out of the way. Now you'll notice it's a little bit different than what we did when we were factoring. Now I'm going to leave a little space there. And I have 8. Okay, now here is the whole completing the square method. What I want to do is pick a number to add right here, and I can add something as long as I balance on the other side. Now my goal is to create that perfect square. So I'm going to take half of this number, so half of it's 1, and square it. So I'll end up with 1. Now, see how I kind of went in a circle? The reason for that is because if I had factored it from the very beginning, see how you would have gotten that perfect square? Doesn't happen very often, but I wanted y'all to see one like that. And then we'll take the square root of both sides. So x plus 1 equals plus or minus 3, and set up my equation. So x plus 1 equals 3, x plus 1 equals negative 3. Move that 1 over. There are my 2 answers. Okay, now let's look at one that's a little bit more complicated, more like what you would actually see. Okay, so I've got this problem right here. I want us to use completing the square to solve this. So I'm going to move the 5 to the other side of the equal sign, just get it out of the way. And then my goal is to complete the square right here, balance it on the other side. Okay, so half of negative 12 is negative 6, squared is 36. Balance on the other side. Now I'm going to factor this thing, so when I factor it, I'll have x minus 6, x minus 6, double check that factoring if you need to, or x minus 6 squared. Okay, and over here I have 31. Okay, so take the square root of both sides, and I have x minus 6 equals plus or minus root 31. Can't simplify that, but I do need the plus or minus. And then I'll add the 6 to the other side. So x equals, I'm going to put the 6 first, 6 plus or minus root 31. Now I've got 2 answers here. My first answer is 6 plus root 31. My second answer is 6 minus root 31. Okay, so let's go through and let's do one more of these. Let's do this one right here. So I'm going to get this thing set up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and move that 6x over with my 3x squared. I'm going to leave the negative 9 where it's at. Now looking at this 3 could be a pain for me to deal with. But I do notice that 3 goes into all of these numbers. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to divide by 3. Just simplify this down. It's going to make my process easier, and basically easier is better. So if you can simplify, go through and do that. Okay, so I'm going to add my number in here, balance on the other side. Alright, so half of the negative 2 and square it, balance over here. Okay, so when I factor that thing, I'm going to have minus 1 minus 1, or x minus 1 squared. And I'm going to catch up over here. And then I'll take the square root of both sides. So x minus 1 equals plus or minus, take care of the negative with the I, root 2. And then I'll move the 1 to the other side. So 1 plus or minus I root 2. So here are my 2 answers. I've got an imaginary number. They're both imaginary. So 1 plus I root 2 is one of my answers. And 1 minus I root 2 is the other. Okay, now the last thing that I want us to do today is I want us to go through and write a couple of equations, maybe 2 of them, in vertex form. Now, we've done this before by finding the vertex, negative b over 2a, and going from there. But I want us to do this by completing the square. So what I'm going to go through and do is just get this thing organized. I'm going to leave a little space there. and I'm going to leave a little space here. Now I want you to remember, I probably should have mentioned this a second ago, this is vertex form. So I want to get it written in this form, which means I need that perfect square in there. What I'm going to do is I can't really move the 2. I'm going to leave the 2 back here, but I'm going to pick a number to group with these guys to create a perfect square. Now, whatever number I add here, I need to balance on the other side of my equal sign. Okay, so let's pick the number. So half of 6 is 3, squared is 9, balance over here, which means when I factor this thing, I'll have x plus 3, x plus 3, or x plus 3 squared. Okay, let me get everything else caught up. I'm going to subtract the 9, so I have minus 7, minus 7, and then the y over here. Okay, now that looks good. I'm in vertex form. So there's my vertex form. If they were to ask you for the vertex, remember it's opposite of what you think there. So negative 3, 7, negative 7. Well, they didn't really ask you for that, but if they did. Okay, and let's do one more, and then we'll call it a day. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing, get it organized, leave a little space there. Leave a little space there. And then I'm going to pick a number to complete my square, balance over here. Okay, so half of negative 10 is negative 5, squared is 25. Balance over here. Alright, so let's get everything cleaned up. So I'm going to factor this thing. And then I'm going to write this as a perfect square. And at the same time, I should probably move the 25 over to group with the 2. And I need to group those, so let me rewrite it, I guess. Equals y. So here's a vertex form. I didn't ask for it, but if I ask for the vertex is at positive 5, opposite of what you think, negative 27. Alright, completing the square, we are going to learn a solving method that's more efficient than it is. However, there are other contexts that you do use completing the square in, so it is something that you need to know.